All right, people are joining us here. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on the important topics that we're going to be exploring. I'm Susan Keating, CEO of the Board Risk Committee, and in a moment, I will introduce our moderator, who is also the founder and chair of the Board Risk Committee. But first, let me just mention a couple of housekeeping deals here. Number one, this webinar is going to be recorded, so it will be sent out to you soon, and you can certainly share it with colleagues, with friends, and so forth. And secondly, we're going to keep everybody muted, but encourage you to go ahead and put any questions in the chat. Kathy Allen, our moderator, and I will be checking the chat and kind of work through questions as we go along, but we'll also try to save some time at the end so you can, again, put some more questions and we can have a little more commentary there. So a bit about the Board Risk Committee. We are a thought leadership organization, a peer council for directors, risk committee members, and executives. We're nonprofit and non-competitive. We're a trusted place for an exchange and sharing of ideas and best practices around really risk oversight, particularly enterprise risk oversight. If you're not already a member of the BRC, we do have kind of a reduced rate from now through June of $200. And if you certainly email me, susan@boardriskcommittee.org, or if in fact you want to just go onto our website, happy to have you join us. So with that, I am delighted to introduce our moderator, Kathy Allen, someone I've known for many decades. She is very well recognized and an absolute outstanding leader in technology strategy, innovation, thought leadership, and has not only addressed boards, but served on a number of boards and actually started out with Citicorp, Dun & Bradstreet. I knew her when she was at BITS, which was a subsidiary of the Financial Services Roundtable. But today, she actually has a company, Shared Assessments, that she sold, but she stays close to. And I was delighted to see her at Shared Assessments conference last week. Gary Roboff, I see you there. I saw you last week as well. So that's great. But also, she was founder of Santa Fe Group, but also had the vision and really the expertise to get the Board Risk Committee up and running. So Kathy, with that, no further ado, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Susan. And Susan is modest. Susan is not only sat on a number of corporate boards, she was the CEO for many years of Women Corporate Directors, and she also was the CEO, first woman CEO of one of the largest banks, and that's how we met at when I was at BITS in the Financial Services Roundtable. So Susan brings as CEO really a lot of not only knowledge of operations, but also many contacts in the corporate world, corporate board world. So today we're going to be hearing from two experts about a very important topic. And the topic is the mental health and stress issues that we're undergoing today and how they're impacting corporations and what boards can do. So let me first introduce our two speakers, Yuly Grosman, who's a corporate speaker, serial entrepreneur, global logistics executive. He's well known for helping executives and first responders think about business issues, in particular, physical security issues, and what truly matters for their people. He has a signature talk, reframe, response, skills needed for our future. He sheds light around the workplace microaggression and empowers executives with frameworks needed to improve workplace culture ecosystems. As we were just mentioning, the gentleman that is being held for the murder of the CEO for United Healthcare, they're asking now for a death penalty for him. So maybe not a good thing in the death penalty, but we certainly see how important it is to look at safety of CEOs as well as all of the people in a corporation. Patricia Chin-Sweeney is a business strategist and executive coach with over 18 years of experience in advising corporations, management, startups, and nonprofits through high-stakes transitions. And this includes risk management, capital raises, and innovation initiatives. She is co-founder of iDev International, a global strategy and investment advisory firm, and she supports clients like Google, Green Mountain Coffee, Eileen Fisher, Grupo, the World Bank, and USAID, navigating very complex and high-risk environments across 45 countries. So the webinar today, as I said, is really focused on what boards need to do. The stresses that people are facing today are everything from the leftover from the pandemic and the loneliness of COVID, the changing climate change, and real concerns about disasters, AI and how technology is changing jobs, the current administration and the layoffs that are going on, sort of the chaos. And as we all know, today is supposed to be Liberation Day to find out what the tariffs will be, and more importantly, the impact that's going to have on the US economy as well as other economies. And geopolitical issues. Who would know or who would think that France and Ireland are telling its citizens to prepare for war, and that Poland is investing in more to defend its borders against Russia. So all of these things, it used to be boards didn't have to think about them, or would say, especially the geopolitical, it's something that our lobbyists think about. But today they're on the board's agenda. And top of mind for boards is talent management, both from, am I going to have the right kind of talent? And is there a shortage in people that we need that perhaps know the technology or the AI? Or am I going to be letting people go because I think AI will, produce the productivity that will replace them? A recent study by Boston Consulting Group shows that they believe 14% of the world's workers are going to be disrupted from their jobs. And what does that mean in terms of retraining and reskilling? But more importantly, what does it mean to the culture and the safety in the workforce? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So I want to start off with, you talk about this. In fact, you did a fabulous risk report for us, which has had lots of opens and read. The term CoTech. Explain to us what CoTech means. And Yuly, maybe you start off, and then again, I want this to be more of a dialogue or a conversation. What do you mean by CoTech, the era of CoTech?
Good morning, good day, everybody. So CoTech is a combination of post-COVID pandemic and technology. And I would dive straight away maybe to some statistics. So 25% of employees today burn out and stress at age 30. We know that 25% of younger employees taking days off and sick days more than people who are above 55 years old. Most relative stress today, it's work, finance, and mental health. I will give Patricia opportunity to add from her perspective as well.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think that all that you mentioned about the geopolitics, the uncertainty about the economy will be a greater impact on, already a financial concern that's causing stress that leads younger employees to take days off, right? And that's actually what studies have said is the reason they are taking those days off. And again, just to be clear, this CoTech is a term that represents the snowball effect of this exponential pace of change that's driven by technology adoption into society and younger generations and how they operate. But as a result, it's also going into the workplace, and it's changing so quickly that it's driving the insecurity of employees around, do I have a job? Do I have the job to support the finances in a ever more expensive reality? And that's just like layers and layers upon, this era that we're entering in. It's not just exponential tech, it's exponential everything that's changing how business is done and how people stay.
So what are some examples of the microaggressions? I mean, everything from what do you see as attacks on CEOs or at what's happening in the workforce? What are examples of that?
So I think Yuli's on mute, but I think he'll have a lot. I'll actually give some interesting examples, but microaggressions at the employee level are things like, subtle comments that over time erode the confidence of different employees and their ability to do their job, question whether they will still have a job as different dynamics in a company are changing that aren't fully communicated, and those continue to grow, which lead to individuals questioning whether they should stay at a company or start looking for something else. That's like the baseline where there's not aggression involved. But Yuly, I don't know if you want to speak to some of the workplace violence statistics. That is actually, of course, the accumulation of these stressors and microaggressions into actual workplace violence incidents.
Yes, definitely. So one more factor that people work remotely, people work from home, and we do have extra distractions that we didn't have before. A child running in a room, a teenager coming back from school with their friends, running around, distracting our meetings, our webinars, conferences, and working from houses. It's bring stress and bring anxiety also to the workplace and communication with our colleagues. We also know that, for example, nurses, we're talking about healthcare. Today, one of each 4 nurses have experience with work-related violence. And we also know that hospitals today implement very interesting process. If nurses express a violence, she's supposed to call to security that might come after 4 or 5 minutes, but these 4 or 5 minutes, she need to deal with the situation by herself. It came to a situation where 13% of the nurses took day off because of this kind of stress and work-related violence.
Yuly, this is Susan. Why don't you get a little closer to your microphone? We could hear Patricia very well, but
yeah, can you hear me now?
Much better. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes. So what I will just repeat very quickly. Nurses deal with work-related violence. 1 of every 4 nurses had this experience before. And today procedure is to call security, who might come after 4 or 5 minutes to deal with the situation. But these 4 or 5 minutes, we never know what can happen to the same nurse, to people who around her. So again, microaggression, it's not necessarily physical aggression. It can be also expression of emotions and frustrations that already accumulated within some period of time.
And it could be body language or, the comments that build up. And you might imagine like certain, I'd say generationally as well. Now we're talking about like Gen Z and younger generations. Various studies say that they are the least, quote unquote, resilient generation, in part because they've been isolated during COVID and pandemic and technology. As a result, they possibly are more sensitive to those comments that lead to greater mental health issues in parallel to the anxiety from technology. And just to add to Yuli's comment around the healthcare sector, since we talked about United Healthcare as well, while workplace violence is something that over 2 million people report each year, and that's just reported, it's growing. It's projected to grow across all sectors and about 5-fold in healthcare. I would also say if we look at the sectors like, logistics, transportation, and some others that will also feel more stressed because of some of the geopolitics, historical data may also not be accurate in what we're projecting going forward, right?
I know one of the workplace issues has also been threats. We've certainly seen that in the political world, threats against one way or another, depending upon the ideology. Are you seeing an increase of threats against either CEOs or senior management or boards or employees? Threats if they do one thing or something, are you seeing the threats being a major problem as well, not just the physical violence?
Yuly, I don't know. I personally don't have specific data on that other than many people saying they have gotten more threats. And I think one of the key things that's highlighted in the report is that there don't need to be as many threats before something big can happen. And that is facilitated by technology, right? Both the over-reliance on technology when it fails, and then also in assessing the opportunity to attack with lesser warning, right? Much like with Luigi Mangione, he could 3D print his own gun, and he didn't need to tell that many people. It just happened.
I actually would like to add to this conversation from my perspective. So LA fires started in January. I was in LA by myself and just went out a day before the fire started. And what's interesting that as we talk about technology and we talk about threat on CEO, we never thought, or many of us never thought about threats of personal life of CEO in the home environment. I was asked to help and run some webinar about because CEO were concerned about suddenly there was no power and alarms went off. They could not alarm the houses. They could not secure their lives in the houses. From our perspective, people were complaining and talking about CEOs. Suddenly they open the door and there's a stranger on the street looking at the houses. So there are many questions that coming up, not necessarily direct threats to CEO, but should be addressed as well, because personal life of CEO should be also inside risk assessment and business continuity plans.
And just to that point, I was just going to say one last thing. So related to the LA fires, I mean, that's a, like a naturally occurring incident where there was sense that there is a risk of fires, but you don't think about the implications of your home security system shutting down, which the time for a home security response team to come to you also leaves a gap where a lot of actually really bad things can happen. So it's an almost over-reliance on that system anyhow. But if it goes down because of fires or infrastructure or cybersecurity attacks or whatever else, you officially don't have it. And now you are left with yourself to defend yourself. And that is your workplace, your home. In the CoTech era, there is a blurred line between like what is work and home, right? And so all of these are dynamics that are, need to be considered.
So both of you bring up a good point, which we at the BRC talk about a lot, is you can't think of a risk in isolation. You have to think about a risk and then the cascading other risks or impacts. So again, we give as an example, you might have a cyber risk, but it might be an operations risk, a reputation risk, employee risk, could be a fire risk. And in case what you're saying here is a fire risk becomes also a personal security risk, and could have other work-related risks out of that. We were at a conference last week of third-party service provider risk executives. And one of the things they were talking about is as you have increasing polarization and disgruntled employees, you either can, as another consideration the boards have to have, is if this culture is not right, it's not just the physical security and the morale, but it's also disgruntled employees who are more likely to do insider threats. So they may be more likely to sabotage internal systems or just be sloppy about what they're doing. Are you seeing an increase in that? And again, we're going to get to what can we do, because we had one of our attendees was just saying she was shocked at the 2 million number of reported statistics, which means there's much more behind it. But what about that? The disgruntled employee and damage to the organization?
So I think this is an interesting time too, because there are more internal threats, right? We think about like with cybersecurity, there's phishing and things like that that can reach employees and cause a vulnerability. But there is that mental health dynamic. There is the disgruntled employee who can use that for an incident as well. And then the other thing that I was going to mention that we talked about before is this phenomenon of ghosting. So new hire ghosting, which has always been a thing that HR is aware of, where employees don't show up the first day of work once they've accepted a job. But that has been growing, and actually across all segments. It's been more prevalent among younger generations, but even among older employees, that is a growing statistic. And it's interesting because there are different theories behind why that happens. Is it just disregard for the company, lack of respect for the company that they're joining? Is it frustration because HR and recruiting processes take so long, and then other opportunities arise? Or is it actually a cultural phenomenon that's shifting, where ghosting in general is more acceptable, right? Because everyone talks on social media now and texting, whatever. In the past, if like you walked up to someone and were having a conversation, that person doesn't just walk away usually. It's rude. It's not socially acceptable. But today, if you're chatting with someone and you don't like what they say, you just leave. And that's much more what we're seeing with younger generation. If they don't like something, hopefully they just leave. But perhaps if they aren't upskilled to work through a problem, they will decide to internalize it and respond in a very harmful way.
So let's shift to what we might be able to do, what corporations, and again, we're looking at this because our attendees are board members, thinking about what kind of questions they want to ask management, or what do they think they can actually do? Because mental health issues are sticky. Many corporations will have benefits that include mental health, but there's been a series of articles about how pilots and even the air control people don't want to say they're having breakdowns because they'll lose their job, or they feel that there's some kind of it impacts their reputation. So how should boards be thinking about this? And what are some practical things that you've seen corporations do? And let's look at everything from the mental health to, I know, Yuly, you've advised a number of people just about physical safety, best practices also. So what kind of advice are you giving boards?
Yeah, and what Yuly didn't mention is he was in LA because he was in this case leading a private training for our CEO in some of those physical aspects of, it's not just response, but it's actually much more holistic, but he can speak more to those physical things. I'll just make a few points quickly and then I can pass it to Yuly. So many companies are talking about upskilling leaders and teams. I think there needs to be more done in that regard, and looking at these human leadership traits as well, right? The authenticity, the empathy, and really the adaptability. And that can be also, the findings of that can be integrated into KPIs for teams. Back to BCG. BCG also released a report, though many have released reports on digital transformation, where there's recommendations that boards have a digital transformation or transformation committee. But what they don't talk about is how digital transformation should include human leadership and human related KPIs. And also, in this evolving period where everything changes so fast, it's also, boards can think about, do they have leadership that's attuned to the changes that need to happen that fast, and what do they look like? What's the plan to get ready for digital transformation? It's really just transformation, right? Digital human transformation in parallel. Once that's implemented, how is it effectively communicated to teams? And what are the KPIs that validate that it is communicated and it is making teams feel more comfortable, confident, comfortable, productive, hitting their performance targets, whether it's like billable hours or whatever else. And then afterwards, what is the endurance of that plan? How do you continue it? That BCG, for example, said that 70% of digital transformation initiatives fail if they're not engaged at the board level more frequently through those different stages. And the board shouldn't be checking every KPI, but perhaps they are looking at the top 5 to 10 KPIs that relate to the digital and the human HR and leadership elements of this transition. And I'll give like it's not weird, but it's a very niche example. So bear with me, and then I'll pass it to Yuly. But I've worked with some companies that see women and women employees as a real asset, and they go in and actually do a diagnostic of companies and do focus groups at different levels of the organization to do NPS scores, Net Promoter Score of employees. But they also pull data on, in some cases, very interesting, where women just didn't think that they could rise within the company. And so they didn't really have a long-term plan to stay with the company. This happens to be for women, but it relates to any, employees. If you do that type of analysis, you get a sense for the microaggressions that might be happening, the sense for leadership, and you're not saying, are you super depressed or do you have suicidal thoughts? But you do get a sense for other tangential indicators of why people might leave and underlying impacts. And now, final comment, in this age where we have younger generations that are perhaps more sensitive to mental health and whatnot, there needs to be a bit of a sensitivity analysis around, are people saying, so our report said that a significant percentage of employees do not feel that their companies have provided adequate mental health support and resources. But I think that also has to be triangulated against, do these people just have more mental health issues so you can keep giving them and it's still not addressing the underlying needs of connectivity, of skills to navigate through when they're in a stressed position to get past it, right? Those types of different capabilities. Yuly, sorry, I'll pass it to you because that was long.
Yeah, so Patricia mentions KPI, and KPI, it's always related to people because people performing the work, people help companies to grow. And as in sales, we usually say, know your client. I would say in security, we should also say, know your employee, or you should know environment of employee. And this is maybe one of the things that will be nice discuss or to adding to reports and board meetings, because imagine yourself, I mean, all of us, most of us hiring in some case people who help us in our personal life. We hire a maid to clean the house. We hire a nanny to look after our kids. We invite plumbers, electricians to our homes and our offices. And now this is very uncertain time where, as you mentioned at the beginning, a huge percent of people losing jobs. LA fire, back to LA fire, people lost houses, lost everything. Not always insurance companies will cover it. So imagine that we're creating a network of people around us who serve us, who know about our personal life, day life, our procedures, our alarm systems, what our day shadows. And imagine that one of these families, they also definitely have their own families and friends. Someone gets sick, someone lost in a fire everything, someone was fired, someone was immigrated from the country, and they need urgent money or they need support. You can find yourself in a situation when one of this huge network which you build around yourself might sell information about you, about your company, and about security processes. So I think this is also one of the things that should be included and discussed in corporates.
So Lisa, you raised your hand. I don't know. Yeah, we can unmute you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I as I'm listening to this, I think about sort of what the board would need to know. And so what's that kind of litmus test that they're actually getting real feedback from employees, or what level they're kind of going down to. But there has to be some degree of psychological safety for people to even respond on some of those surveys. And I think that's testing that. How do we test that within a company to decide if you're even going to get that kind of a response? Because most of these surveys, you probably would hear if you ask the employees, are you confident everything's confidential? Maybe, maybe not. And in this climate, I think people are feeling that less and less as we're reading headlines and other things, whether it applies to us or not specifically. But how do you kind of overcome that or test that? What do you put in place to decide if you actually have the credible results going back to the board to get that sensibility of how employees are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously a very hard question to answer if nobody trusts the company that they're working for example. But I that's why I thought the example I gave is interesting, because it's a third party. This company is called Value for Women, and it is very niche. But it's interesting because they actually, I mean, one, they do require the commitment of the leadership to take them on a very methodical process of discovery. And then the information is confidential surveys, but that's managed by a third party and then aggregated based on trends. And then in that case, there are various steps that are train the trainer methodologies, right? So then they pick champions within the company to strengthen. I mean, this case would be human leadership. In that case, it's like specific to making sure that men and women employees feel safe in the ways that they've expressed they needed it. But, then you build the upskilling, the leadership development programs that most companies are talking about doing anyhow, to be paired back with what that data shows you. And again, it's anonymized surveys. So the employees in many cases shouldn't be giving individual information anyhow. I do think there's benefit if there's enough trust to do it at team and department levels, because you might see patterns around what different teams need and look at, it's hard with larger companies, but is there some flexibility, or are there incentive structures, for example, like hybrid work? If you're seeing your best people doing great at hybrid work, is that something that you keep because that'll keep them there longer, and factoring that against the cost of turnover, right, and hiring new people. So, and I can mention, I mean, there's some other KPIs that parties might think about that we can talk about, but I'll just pause there.
So one of the things we did at Women Corporate Directors a few years ago was right before COVID and then during COVID, looked at the what corporations wanted in terms of leadership, either on the board as board directors or as the CEO. And before COVID, it was, operational kinds of things, financial knowledge or acumen, knowledge of the industry, operational experience, C-level experience. During and after COVID, it was more soft skills. It was things like empathy, some that you've already mentioned, empathy, the ability to pivot quickly, the ability to empower teams, the ability to articulate a vision and then take people along, not make them, but bring people along with you. And then also leadership by example. And those, the interesting thing is it's harder to teach soft skills. I can teach you finance. Can I teach you empathy? And so how do you get the leaders? And by that, I mean the people on the board, as well as the CE or the C team, to be aware of that and testing them to see if they've got those soft skills, and what should the board be asking of management about the soft skills.
Yeah, and I think also what is interesting too, back to, I know somebody just asked about building trust in companies too. It is a culture shift sometimes in organizations, and maybe a way to do it to soften that is to run trials like across a specific function of the company, to look at the data that shows it improved turnover metrics, productivity, and other factors before rolling out a training program everywhere, right? That maybe doesn't work. And as a result, also has like the frustration that comes with it. But to your point, empowerment and communication needs to strengthen. So, also what Yuly will talk about is some of his workshops are about not overthinking it and just talking about things, but experiencing having to interact and get through situations together. I'll talk about some of the just KPI indicators to think about as well. So one is, adaptability to market changes. That's a broader consideration. But engaging and retaining talent, an indicator, team alignment. Some of these are hard to train on, but these are things that you can peg whether training is successful on soft skills. Employee engagement, team productivity, and then our teams like inspired, integrated, informed, invested, feel they're invested in. And I think those are some things that need to be built into the KPIs that boards want to think about asking for from management.
So Yuly, what about you? And also, I want to get to the question from you. Well, you use the word or the initials A and I in your risk report. And the risk report, by the way, is in chat. So anybody can download it if you didn't already get it. So respond to what Patricia just said, but also then move to talking about A and I.
Yuly, do you want to?
Yeah, so AI, it's short for a new I. Everybody knows what is AI, artificial intelligence. My proposition was AI, it's who are we today in today's digital world? How we perceive information, how information presented to us, and more important, how our kids today, who I believe have less mental opportunities that generation Y had before, how they can make the right decisions in the future, because our kids, it's the next generations of leaders. What are the new values that presented today in society? So a new I, it's not only about mental health. A new I, it's everything. By the way, it's also include health issues. We can see, I don't need to go to statistics, but most of the people today spending hours on hours with mobile devices, looking at the phone, looking at computers, and we already have a term that is called tech neck. Tech neck, it's a syndrome that causes pain to your neck. It's come with frustrations, come with stress, it comes with headaches and shoulders pain. All these coming back to the corporations, coming back to the work productivities. So again, a new I, it's who is I as a person, not as CEO, not as employee, not as HR manager, but as, for example, in my case, Yuly, and what represents me, what stands for me and my kids in today and tomorrow in the near future.
So let's go back to the topic of trust, because again, that it starts from the top down, which is the board and the CEOs. And I know I've worked with an ad agency for a while that worked with boards about articulating what their values were, and then helping them once those were articulated, whether it was the customer comes first or providing world-class customer service. But then they would test by calling the customer service or buying a product. And if there was a disconnect, they were saying it's even worse. So it's better not to say anything if you're not going to do it. If you say you're going to do one thing, do the other, then you build, distrust within the organization. How can a board or a CEO rebuild that trust with its employees? What are some of the ways you've seen that happen? Because some of the people that have just added in chat, many people, especially people of ethnic backgrounds, don't want to answer when they have to answer, what race are they, what ethnic. They're very concerned, how's this going to be used against me? And I think there's even greater concern right now on stress because of the concerns about the data, all the data that's out there about them and how that's going to be used.
Yeah. I think that's fair, and that's a very hard thing for companies to navigate. I think on more localized within the company level, what can be controlled, is back to KPIs and OKRs, having leaders set the high level strategy, but empowering teams to be a part of holding the leaders and managers accountable to metrics that they think are important as well. That, to be fair, honestly, is not answering, how do people feel that their information about race or gender or mental health, how do they feel protected around that, other than, perhaps having just like an innovation function of a company that is basically treated as a separate entity, having something like that that's either an internal or external function where there is a commitment to completely anonymized information or that barrier. Again, finding trusted service providers. I think this is a really interesting time, and that's why we'll see an even more, exponential spike in anxiety, because there are so many more people fearful of that information that they can't change. It's already out there, right? And there have been companies that have stood up for like their their policies for DE&I or whatever else. I think that's great. I think that now everyone as an individual needs to stand by that if they also want to support that as the business culture of the future. And if we actually look back to the humanity of the workforce and the demographics of the workforce, there's a statistic in our report that Gen Z is the most diverse generation, right? Everyone is not everyone, but a vast majority is like 1 to 2 degrees of separation from an immigrant or a minority. And so that, back to Yuli's point too, is like, that is affecting individuals, whether it's, an official metric that a company has ever tracked or not. It's there and it will be felt.
Uh,
Go ahead, Yuly.
Yes, I would like just to add an interesting point. So we talk about customer care, about KPI, we talk about CoTech pandemic and A&I. I always like personal examples. So I'm not a native English speaker, as you notice, as you know. I will give you my own frustration. I'm usually a very calm person. Some weeks ago, I had a suspect for a fraud with some logistic company without mentioning name, and I called customer care. And automating system asking me what is my problem. I'm trying to explain that there's suspect for fraud, and as you can see, now I cannot pronounce it in the right accent. And the system keeps asking me the same time. I getting the answer. I cannot understand your problem. What is your problem? So almost 5 minutes, and I just make a trial by myself. Almost 5 minutes. I'm trying to explain to the system that there's a fraud suspect. System not providing me any results. You're not transferring me to the human representative. So imagine yourself. I can see some people in the audience smile and laugh about it. So imagine yourself how all this, what is the number of population who are not native English speaker or in any country, not only US, and what kind of frustration, aggression, stress can bring it in the future, and how that as a snowball will come back to corporates and to the board.
Well, I'll have to admit, I've said a few bad words to Comcast when I've been on for 3 hours. So the systems themselves, I think, are failing this in many ways. And that actually brings me to another point is agentic AI, and the fact that not only are we concerned about, I tend to look at the risks of AI. I think there's fabulous opportunity in both healthcare and productivity and innovation, but there's also a lot of risks. And we were talking last week about this, when you have the ability for a system to think on its own and without human intervention, and what destructive ways that might be used. And I think when we think about who's building the systems, who's writing the code, or, are we sure, how do we trust that? And we already know there's much disinformation in ChatGPT and some of the other AI apps. So how do we humanize that? How do we make sure that there are guardrails for humans as we go forward with AI?
So back to what Yuly mentioned about a new I, and when we think about, future generations, rising generations, and this human leadership element, part of this is critical thinking, right? And, which is being eroded in part because there's a shift to technology. I think when we look at AI and where it's going, it is always based on the quality of the training data, to your point, and how diversified it is. And there have, as of now, been humans to course correct some of it with a human critical eye. Now, the question is, will enough humans be adequately trained where their critical thinking function is kept intact such that they will add value to AI running on its own, or will AI run at the same pace to do the critical thinking and assessment itself? So whether it's bad or not, I think, like you said, there's good and upsides to AI. And now we're at the point where it's, do we want to build the human leadership, the human empathy component into the way that we continue to adapt society, business culture, and growth going forward? And Yuly, I don't know if you want to talk about obviously, OpenAI and some of the other things that have obviously some of the things they've found.
Actually, I would like to talk about reconnecting people. So the question was also what board can ask from the companies to do. I think it will be nice, and I saw it in different countries, different places. Reading books, weekends, instead of doing corporates reunions, weekends or once in a quarter, the entire family of employees coming to the office and spending time together without technology. Besides of communication and the reconnection between people who work in the company, a head of department, security officers, CEOs, they can also observe and to recognize red lights about certain employees and his behavior and his body language, the way he communicates with his family or family communicate with him. So these kind of actions can also provide a necessary information to the CEO, to the corporate, and at the same time to connect and reconnect people together. There's a company in Israel, it's not a secret, Teva Pharmaceutical. They have very interesting procedure. Even people who resign from the company, finish working there, every month, the entire family going for vacation. And it's a big value to the corporate. It's a big value for HR, and I believe it's very helpful. So if companies can start implementing this kind of engagement, personal, natural human engagement, it might be also very helpful. At the same time, I would just add one more thing. So about KPIs, about reports, because of many companies today implementing this technology solutions, I think that part of report should be what percentage of decision that's happened in the quarter, in a year, in a half year was made by technology, analyzed by technology, and what percentage of this was reviewed by professionals who completely disconnected from technology.
Interesting. So one of the good news things in the Edelman surveys that they do every year on trust, actually corporations or businesses at the highest level of trust, the lowest level is government, and NGOs are sort of in between, and academia is not rated very highly. So again, back to that trust, and then looking at the culture of an organization and how do you assess that. You've given us some tools, to think about how to do that. Certainly going to get metrics that you can hold accountable the leaders is important. I think what you're saying is there just needs to be more reasons for human touch within the organization. So I like that idea too. I do know that I think it's in this time of chaos that I encourage leaders to communicate even more not to lie, not to say everything is going to be okay, don't worry about anything, because there are real worries, but maybe to give some, here's some actions we're taking on this, or here's some actions we're taking around anything, to really have a good sense of what is worrying their employees, and then for the employees to feel like they're actually doing something, or even getting the employees involved to do something. So that's one of it. So I'm going to open to questions, and actually, Gary Roboff, I'm going to call on you because you've led. I'll put you on the spot just because I know you. Gary, by the way, is on our board, but he's brilliant, and he's been leading a lot of the efforts on ESG and the environment and climate change and things like that. And any comments or questions you want to ask again about how that's impacting employees within corporations and what corporations should be doing.
So thank you, Kathy, for putting me on the spot a little bit. So I come back to something that somebody mentioned earlier around sort of the divisions in society and the polarization that's happened. And there's no better place to talk about polarization, at least from a governmental perspective, than when you think about these so-called woke values of climate and of human rights and all other things that, and we see this translated into the workplace every day. So what do you do about that? And, you know, part of this is driven by the external environment. As Americans become deeply divided, perhaps, it's more and more difficult for them to not be deeply divided in work, right? If you can't have a conversation with your brother or your sister without getting into fisticuffs, then you know the likelihood of you're not being able to maintain a calm demeanor in the office sometimes, even, I'm not saying this happens every time, but it's part of what I think drives the way that people behave. People, especially if people have not been in a work environment inside of an office with any type of continuity, which is certainly the case in the last 4 or 5 years post-COVID, you don't learn how to behave. I hate to be so basic, but part of what we do in life and the way that we function in corporate environments is we learn how to interact with people, we learn how to respect people, we learn how to operate. Without that kind of reinforcement on a regular basis, I think it makes it much more tricky for people to help any business do what it wants to do most effectively and efficiently. It's very difficult for a business to perform optimally if people are not operating as a team. And the word team is used loosely, but think about what it really means. There's a social aspect, there's a behavioral aspect to being a team. It doesn't just mean people coming together to do a task. It means how they come together and work together to do better at achieving a task. That's what's lost. And not all of it is anybody's fault. I don't know whose fault COVID was, but it certainly wasn't anybody in the workplace. And the ramifications of that type of a sustained environment we're seeing today.
Yeah, and I would just say, so I mean, I think that's what you're spot on. And back to this point of trust, we can't control everything external to a company, right? But human connection and communication is it's what actually builds more trust than anything, even, really rational or metrics oriented.
Right.
It's just hard to understand sometimes because it is not it's not as tangible in some regards. There are, different companies that are implementing more like seminars that re-engage that really human element. Again, that's similar to what Yuly does. Coaching programs that on an individualized basis gives support to team members, in part, to help them work together and get through those things. And then there's mentorship programs, right? Where lower ranking employees get paired with more senior employees or even external parties to foster basically what everyone actually wants to reduce their anxiety, which is like a human connection that supports them through,
So Patricia and Kathy, I think Ambassador Jones had her hand up. Did you want to say something, Deborah? Callie, can you unmute?
Yeah, let me
Deborah?
unmute myself. Yeah. I just
Okay.
wanted to say really quickly on adding on to what Gary had just said. What's so troubling right now is that our CEO in chief as a nation is resorting to behaviors that a lot of us saw 30 years ago and 35 years ago in settings. And I'll never forget a very important, Roz Ridgway was the first female assistant secretary for the European Bureau at the State Department. And it was a real groundbreaking thing. And she would gather and she would mentor the younger female officers because, as many of you will know, until 1972, if you were married, you had to quit the foreign service, and you couldn't come in as a regular and have a full kind of life. But one of the things she commented on was that part of being recognized as having met, as being one of the gang, one of the leadership, one of the team. We've talked a lot, and you've talked a lot in this about team building, was that when you make a mistake, people know that you gave it your best shot, and they just say, okay, you gave it your best shot, let's move on. What we've seen here in two egregious examples was that the minute you had that tragic Black Hawk accident with the Delta aircraft in Washington, it's the only one, and there have been accidents over the years, and there are accidents all the time, but our CEO in chief called it out as a DEI issue. And immediately, but then when they had their screw up on signal, it's okay, you screwed up, let's just move on. It's that same old, same old, same old. And it gets back to that fundamental thing. Do you anticipate success from your employees or your team, and you do everything to support that success? Or do you anticipate failure, and the minute that something goes wrong, it's because they are fill in the blank? Black, gray, green, female, disabled, whatever that is. I just wanted to throw that in because I think we're seeing that in spades right now, a reversion at the top to very bad management styles that we used to see.
Right.
This is a little different, but I would also say that I don't think there's enough talk of HR department upskilling and how they look at who they want to hire as well. Again, to Deborah's point and others, it's hard when it comes from top down in that regard still. So
we are at the top of the hour. Boy, I have learned a lot from you all, and I encourage all of you, if you haven't read the risk report that we just published from Yuly and Patricia, please do, because this is a topic that's actually not being spoken of enough, certainly at board meetings or even in the general press. The really anxiety, or at least I'll say that in the business press, the anxiety that's out there and the impact that has on employees and therefore has on corporations. So it's something that board members need to be asking, they need to be on top of, they need to be concerned about. And really, we've had some great examples that have come up just not only from Patricia, but also in chat about mentoring programs and training and coaching and identifying the traits that you want to be modeled in an organization. So I want to thank you, Yuly and Patricia, really a great discussion. And I hope you all will join us again. We have another webinar coming up, primarily, which will be interesting. It's on cybersecurity and the art of negotiation when you have a ransomware attack. And this is a board decision on if you pay for ransomware and how you pay. And you're going to hear from some professionals that have done this for many corporations on how boards need to be thinking about that. That is on Tuesday, May the 6th at 11 o'clock, our regular time frame. Again, we hope you will join us as members if you're not already a member. And we thank you again, and thank you, Yuly and Patricia, for this great webinar. Take care.